In the late 1960s, a killer stalked the quiet roads of Northern California, and instead of hiding, he wrote letters. He mailed ciphers to newspapers, boasting that he'd killed dozens, and signed every letter with a name that would haunt the country for decades. The Zodiac. He shot young couples parked in their cars. He stabbed a couple having a picnic beside a lake. He shot a cab driver in the middle of a residential street, then vanished into the dark, followed only by two frightened teenage witnesses. Police chased thousands of leads. The FBI got involved. One of his 4 ciphers took investigators 51 years to crack. And then, as suddenly as he appeared, the Zodiac went silent. No arrest, no trial, no confirmed identity. Decades later, DNA testing, amateur code breakers, and new suspects have all promised an answer. None of them have delivered one that everyone agrees on. This is the story of the Zodiac Killer, America's most famous unsolved case, and the identity that still officially remains unknown. Most investigators consider the beginning took place on a cold December night in 1968 on a stretch of road just outside Vallejo, California, known as Lake Herman Road. 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen had parked there after a date, a popular spot for teenagers in the area. Sometime that night, someone approached their car and opened fire. Both teenagers were killed. There was no clear motive, no robbery, nothing stolen. Investigators had a crime scene, but no suspect, no weapon, and no explanation. For months, investigators had little to go on. There was no connection to organized crime, no known relationship between the victims and any suspect, and no similar case in the area's history to compare it to. The murders were shocking, but in isolation, they looked like a singular, senseless act, not the beginning of anything larger. 6 months later, in July 1969, a nearly identical attack happened just a few miles away at a spot called Blue Rock Springs. Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau were sitting in a parked car when a second vehicle pulled up beside them. A flashlight beam hit their window, and then gunfire followed. Farron was killed. Mageau survived, though badly wounded, and would later give police one of the only physical descriptions of the killer that exists. Less than an hour after the attack, a man called the Vallejo Police Department, calmly reporting the shooting himself, then hung up before anyone could trace the call. During that call, he calmly told the dispatcher exactly where to find the bodies, and added, almost as an afterthought, that he was also responsible for a killing the previous December on Lake Herman Road. It was the first confirmation that both attacks were connected, and that whoever did this wasn't finished. Weeks later, 3 nearly identical letters arrived at 3 different newspapers. Each letter included 1/3 of a 408-symbol cipher and a demand that it be published. The letters were signed with a crossed circle symbol. By the end of that summer, fear had spread through the Bay Area. Parents kept teenagers home, and the killer, apparently unsatisfied with letters alone, was preparing to introduce himself directly. By September, the attacks escalated in a way that made the case even harder to explain. At Lake Berryessa, a man wearing a black hood approached 2 college students, claiming he was an escaped convict. He then produced a rope, tied them both up, and attacked them with a knife. Shepard did not survive. Hartnell did, and provided investigators with the clearest description yet of the attacker. Before leaving, the attacker walked to the victim's car and wrote the dates of all his attacks on the door. The final confirmed attack came in October in San Francisco itself. Cab driver Paul Stein picked up a passenger who directed him toward the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Moments later, Stein was shot and killed in his own taxi. 3 teenagers watching from a nearby window saw the killer calmly wipe down the cab before walking away. Despite an immediate, large-scale police search, the man was never conclusively identified. 5 confirmed victims, 2 survivors, and a killer who had just proven he was impossible to ignore. 3 weeks after the Paul Stein murder, the killer wrote directly to a Vallejo detective, not to confess, but to boast. The letter began with 4 words that would come to define the entire case. "This is the Zodiac speaking." The Zodiac chose that name for a reason. In one letter, he explained that it referred to his crossed circle symbol, meant to represent the 12 houses of the Zodiac, though some investigators believe it was simply drawn from a wristwatch face. Whatever its origin, the symbol became inseparable from the case, appearing on nearly every letter that followed. It was the first time the killer had used that name for himself. Investigators had a serial attacker on their hands. Now they had a name and a voice. Alongside the letter was something stranger, a cryptogram, 340 symbols long, split into 3 parts, and mailed to 3 separate newspapers. The killer claimed the cipher, once solved, would reveal his identity. He demanded it be printed on the front page, or, he warned, he would go on a killing spree over the weekend. The newspapers published it. Within days, codebreakers across the country were racing to crack it. The one who succeeded wasn't a professional cryptographer at all. Donald and Betty Hardin, a schoolteacher couple from Salinas, California, worked the cipher by hand over a single weekend. They noticed the killer had made a common substitution cipher mistake, misspelling several words, and used that flaw to break the code. What the message revealed was not a name. It was a chilling statement of motive. The killer wrote that he enjoyed killing because it was, in his words, the most dangerous game of all, and that killing gave him a form of afterlife, collecting his victims as slaves. It was disturbing. It was also, notably, incomplete. Even solved, the message never gave investigators a name. Meanwhile, the hardened solution to the first cipher became public knowledge almost overnight, printed in papers across the country. It made the killer, for a moment, feel exposed, and his letters grew more erratic and more boastful in response, at one point claiming, falsely, that his body count was far higher than police could confirm. For the next several months, more letters followed, taunting, mocking the police, occasionally threatening school children. In April 1970, one arrived containing a bleeding heart drawing and a direct threat to attack a school bus, shooting the tires and picking off children as they fled. Schools across the Bay Area increased patrols. Parents drove their kids rather than risk the bus. The threat, like so much else in this case, was never carried out, but it didn't need to be. The fear alone was the point. Each one kept the case in headlines and kept the public's fear alive. But one cipher remained, a second, shorter cryptogram, 340 characters, known simply as Z340. Unlike the first, this one resisted every attempt to break it, not for months, but for decades. Professional cryptographers tried. The FBI tried. Amateur code breakers around the world tried. The unsolved Z340 cipher, on the other hand, became something else entirely, a kind of open puzzle that outlived the investigation itself. Amateur code breakers worldwide submitted thousands of proposed solutions over 5 decades. Nearly all of them were wrong. For 51 years it held. Then, in December 2020, a team of 3 independent code breakers, an American, a Belgian, and an Australian, using specialized software, finally cracked it. When the cipher finally fell in 2020, the FBI confirmed the solution, but noted publicly that it did not identify a suspect. The 3 men who cracked it had never met in person before working together, using pattern recognition software to test thousands of possible symbol-to-letter combinations. The solved message contained no confession and no name either. It read, in part, as a taunt about not being caught and a claim about not fearing the gas chamber because, in the killer's words, it would send him to paradise faster. 2 ciphers solved, 0 identity confirmed. Whoever the Zodiac Killer was, he had spoken directly to the public, to the police, and to history itself, and still walked away untouched. For a case built on silence and anonymity, it remains a strange kind of victory, a 51-year-old code broken and a killer still, to this day, without a face. Over 5 decades, investigators built files on more suspects than almost any other unsolved case in American history. Thousands of names were submitted, investigated, and eventually set aside. But one name rose above the rest and stayed there for decades. Arthur Lee Allen, a former teacher and convicted sex offender from Vallejo, first came to police attention in 1971 when an acquaintance reported suspicions about him. He matched several elements of the composite sketch, lived near key crime scenes, and had access to a typewriter similar to the one used for Zodiac letters. Investigators searched his home and trailer in 1991, seizing guns, knives, and bomb-making materials, but none of it directly tied him to the murders. No confirmed handwriting match, no confession, no forensic evidence linking him to the scenes. In 2002, DNA testing on a Zodiac letter excluded Allen as the source, though experts noted the sample may have been contaminated over the decades. Allen died the same year, without ever being charged. For many investigators who worked the case, he remained the strongest suspect they ever found, just never provable. He was far from the only name investigators seriously considered. Over the years, forensic genealogists, amateur sleuths, and journalists proposed dozens of other candidates. Nearly every one of them was eventually ruled out, by alibi, by DNA, or by simple lack of evidence. DNA became the great hope of modern investigators. The idea that a single genetic trace could finally end 50 years of speculation. But the physical evidence in the case, old envelopes, aging stamps, decades-handled letters, had been touched by too many people for too long. Every DNA test conducted has produced partial, degraded, or inconclusive results. No genetic profile has ever been confirmed and matched to a named suspect. In 2021, a group calling itself the Case Breakers announced they had solved the case entirely. They named a deceased electronics technician, Gary Francis Post, claiming cipher analysis and circumstantial evidence proved his guilt. The claim made international headlines within hours. For a brief moment, the world's most famous cold case appeared closed. The San Francisco Police Department quickly issued a statement. The case remained open and unsolved. Independent researchers and code breakers who had spent decades on the case disputed the group's cipher analysis, calling their methodology deeply flawed. No court, no DNA match, and no law enforcement agency has ever confirmed the claim. Officially, as of today, the Zodiac Killer's identity remains unconfirmed. More than 50 years later, the case sits in an unusual position, technically active, practically unsolvable, and endlessly reinvestigated. Every few years, a new name surfaces. Every few years, that name is quietly set aside. Then, in 2026, the case resurfaced in headlines once again, this time with a name attached. Independent investigator Alex Baber claimed to have decoded a previously unexamined cipher, identifying the Zodiac Killer as a man named Marvin Margolis. Baber went further, linking the same individual to another infamous unsolved case, the 1947 murder known as the Black Dahlia. The claim spread quickly online, and for a moment, it seemed the decades-long mystery might finally be over. But this was not the first time Baber had made a confident identification. In 2022, Baber had publicly named a different man as the Zodiac Killer, a claim that was later disputed and ultimately did not hold up. That history made investigators, journalists, and longtime researchers approach the new claim with caution. As of this recording, law enforcement agencies have acknowledged reviewing the claim, but have not confirmed it. Independent code breakers and researchers who have spent years on the Zodiac ciphers have publicly questioned Baber's methodology, much as they did with the case breakers' claim in 2021. No court has weighed in. No definitive forensic match has been presented. The claim remains exactly what so many before it have been, a theory, not a verdict. And so, officially, the Zodiac Killer's identity remains what it has always been, unknown. It's worth asking why this particular case has refused to fade, when so many others from the same era have been forgotten. Part of it is the letters, a killer who spoke directly to the public, in his own words, again and again. And part of it is simply the absence of an ending, a story with no final chapter ever gets retold. The case has shaped decades of culture far beyond the original investigation, inspiring films, documentaries, and countless amateur investigations. Streaming documentaries and dramatized retellings continue to introduce the case to new generations, decades after the last confirmed letter arrived. Online, forums and research communities are still active, still comparing notes, still testing new theories. The investigation may have gone quiet. The public's fascination never did. Somewhere between the solved cipher and the unsolved one, between the strongest suspect and the one still disputed, the case remains exactly where it started. 5 confirmed victims, 2 ciphers solved, thousands of suspects investigated, and a name that, officially, no one has ever proven. The record closed. The mystery didn't. If you have a theory of your own about who the Zodiac Killer really was, leave it in the comments below. This is a case the public has never stopped investigating. And if you want more cases like this one, subscribe. There are more files waiting to be opened.